We are
I'm
recording.
trying to, okay, right. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on what part of the world that you're in. I'm Maria Volpe. I'm a professor at John Jay College and director of the Dispute Resolution Program. This breakfast, as it was always known, more recently we're referring to it as the Roundtable breakfast, started in 9/11, after the attacks on the World Trade Center. We met in person at John Jay College until March 2020. Since April 2020, we have been meeting virtually here. So welcome everyone. They are co-sponsored by the Association for Conflict Resolution of Greater New York, better known as ACR-GNY, and the Dispute Resolution Center at John Jay College. Each month, these events are put together by a wonderful committee that I'm a part of, including Matthew Latimer, Nikki Borofsky, Chloe Choi, and Kirsten Pugh. We're so delighted each month to have our colleagues from around the world joining us, both as participants and as speakers. These events are recorded. They are posted on two websites. The John Jay website, www.jjay.cuny.edu/dispute, and the ACR-GNY website, www.acrgny.org. And in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a link to recordings. Feel free to click on that to readily access the recordings there as well. We are so excited to have with us this morning Dianne Williams, who will talk to us about restorative justice. And I'm going to turn this over to Nikki Borofsky, who is going to introduce Dianne more formally. Take it away, Nikki.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody, and welcome from all over the world. Before we begin, I just want to extend a special thank you to Kirsten Pugh for her role in recommending and helping to coordinate the bringing of today's speaker to the virtual podium. I am delighted to introduce Dr. Dianne Williams. She is a distinguished expert in restorative justice and conflict resolution. She has worked significantly and influenced policies and practices in these fields and far beyond. Her international experience spans the globe. We were just talking about all of the amazing places that she's been in the last few years in our preparatory conversation, and it truly is amazing. She has a strong, especially strong background in the Caribbean and Latin America, and she's focused on criminology, peace and conflict studies, conflict resolution, mediation, cultural competency, and of course, restorative practice. Dr. Williams' background includes serving as a criminologist and consultant and advanced studies participant at Harvard University Kennedy School of Government, the International Institute for Restorative Practices, which was already called out in our pre-discussion as a great resource, and the National Defense University William J. Perry Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies, where she is rostered as an adjunct instructor. And that is not the full extent of her instructor duties. She's truly has a deep and wide practice of teaching. She is certifiable in all the good ways. She's a clinically certified criminal justice specialist, a certified sentence mitigation specialist, a certified social and behavioral search investigator, and a certified mediator. She is additionally a licensed trainer of trainers in restorative practices and specializes in crime prevention through community engagement and environmental design. Among many, many notable publications, Dr. Williams co-authored the 2012 United Nations Human Development Report for Trinidad and Tobago, and her work with the Democracy, Politics, and Engagement DPACE initiative emphasizes building conflict literacy and resilience and offering constructive alternatives to conflicts that undermine social and community progress. For me, Dr. Williams brings a wealth of knowledge to our discussion, and moreover, her journey is emblematic of the incredible power and positive influence possible when experts pay close attention to systemic challenges and use their cumulative experiences and flexible minds to craft cross-cutting, sustainable solutions that blend academic rigor with practical application. Her dedication to transforming conflict resolution practice has had a profound impact on communities around the world, promoting peace and understanding things at both macro and micro levels. Today, we will get a lucky glimpse of this insight as Dr. Williams shares her thoughts on restorative practices, a discursive public health approach to wrongdoing and the wrongdoer, and explores how these practices can promote systemic change and help foster peaceful coexistence and break cycles of violence. So in a world filled with accusation, allegation, and wrong, I can't think of a more important or relevant conversation to have. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Dianne Williams. Dr. Dianne Williams, it's your stage.
Thank you so much. I was listening to you and thinking, ooh, who is that person? But I appreciate the warm welcome. And I'm grateful to the organizing committee for inviting me. To make sure that I honor everyone's time, I'm going to start sharing my screen because this is what keeps me on time. So, and can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
We need presenter mode. We can see the screen.
Yeah.
Yes, there we go.
Yes, perfect.
Perfect.
Thank you. So, I want to start off talking a little bit about my journey, then do some definitions and comparisons. I want to talk about the restorative practices typology, as well as compare restorative practices versus restorative justice, then touch on restorative practices pillars. Then we will talk about the discursive approach, which really is coming out of a publication that I did. But let me start by saying that I have been described as a reformed criminologist. About 2 months ago, I did a presentation for the National Defense University to a class of high-level military participants. The presentation was using restorative justice to reduce armed conflict. And when I was being introduced, I was introduced as a reformed criminologist. And I recognize that indeed I am. So I historically criminologist lecturing at the University of the West Indies and becoming really deeply concerned about increasing recidivism rates. So I was invited to a conference, and there was a young lady there from the IIRP who spoke about the impact of restorative practices. I reached out to the young lady and asked her if she would do a private presentation. I invited 20 of my colleagues. I set up a session in Tobago, invited her. My intention was she would do the circles training, and then we would implement it, and then I would invite her back to do the conferences training for those who are familiar with the process. So she came, she did the circles training, and I did a post-presentation review, and the reviews were all bad. So now I'm embarrassed, and now this impacts my ability to do the second part of the training. So I took myself off to IIRP and I became trained. And then I hosted free of charge, because everyone paid for the first segment, free of charge because I'm embarrassed. And I hosted the conferencing. I'm happy to say I got good reviews. And then the train just left the station and there was no turning back. One of the observations I've had over time is the fact that as a society, we focus on the symptom and not the problem. We focus on what we see in front of us, which is actually the symptom. Crime is a symptom of a deeper social problem. And every solution that we put forth, every solution that we implement is a solution for the symptom and not the deeper problem, which is why our solutions tend to be short-lived. So because I consider myself to be a lifelong educator and peace builder, I continued my training. I went back and did a master's in restorative practices at the IIRP, and a second train left the station. So most recently, I accepted a position as a, I'm trying to get the words right, conflict and violence prevention training coordinator. It's all intertwined. And so I'm now even more embedded in addressing the problem, in using restorative practices to proactively reduce conflict and reactively foster healing. And so you'll see me talk a bit about that as we move along today. In some quarters, restorative practices and restorative justice are used interchangeably, but they are in fact not. For me, restorative practices is a lifestyle, and restorative justice is the criminal justice system's response to wrongdoing. For me, restorative justice is subsumed under restorative practices. However, I have seen the reverse being applied. The reason I refer to restorative practices as the umbrella or the chapeau is because if you cannot walk the walk, if you cannot live the lifestyle, then you cannot be expected to implement the processes, whether it be in the criminal justice system or in the classroom. So I feel that restorative practices should be the chapeau. We should be living it every day. When I train folks on restorative practices, I train them on, I know there are some practitioners in the room, on using the affective statements, the affective language, on an individual basis. When someone approaches you in an aggressive way, your response can escalate or de-escalate the situation. And that's why I think living the lifestyle or walking the talk is more important or is foundational before we can even implement it in our criminal justice system. Restorative practitioners acknowledge that the vast majority of wrongdoers can be rehabilitated, which means that a very small percentage must be regulated to the traditional criminal justice system, and yet everyone is painted with the same brush. As soon as you come into contact with the system, you're painted a certain way. And as I've said to some commissioners of police and some directors of prisons, if you treat individuals in the criminal justice system like animals, when they are eventually released, they will behave like animals. To be clear, restorative justice was never meant to be an alternative to the existing criminal justice system. In fact, to be truly effective, they must work in tandem. Restorative processes and principles must be embedded into and operate within the traditional criminal justice system. And I wanted to put that out there first because I tend to get questions about, but it's so soft and it's just a slap on the wrist. The process acknowledges that there must be some measure of accountability. There must be some acknowledgement of wrongdoing. However, the consequences need not necessarily be punitive, because individuals who are found guilty of crimes are sent to prison as punishment, not for punishment. And I'll touch on that a little bit in a few. The way you treat them when they're incarcerated is adding insult to injury. They're already incarcerated and losing their rights as punishment, and then they are being punished by virtue of the quality of existence within the correctional system. I also want to make a distinction between restorative justice and mediation. Mediators are impartial, neutral, and non-directive. Everyone in this room, I'm sure, knows that. Participants work to create their own solutions. Everyone in this room knows that. A restorative practitioner must first have the wrongdoer accept responsibility. That is not necessarily the case in mediation. And in a restorative process, outcomes are managed beforehand. In mediation, there is not necessarily a case of hurt. In a restorative process, one person has in fact hurt the other. One party has hurt the other. One group has hurt the other. One country has hurt another. In mediation, those things need not necessarily exist. In fact, in mediation, opposing parties have different stances on a particular topic. Now, you will notice that sometimes the court system sends folks for mediation. Mediation has become a catch-all phrase, but it can sometimes be misleading because restorative processes require one party has actually hurt the other, the wrongdoer has acknowledged the wrongdoing, there's a need to repair the harm, the victim has agreed, etc. So restorative processes are undergirded by a specific process. It involves primary stakeholders, the wrongdoer and the victim, or the person who has caused the harm and the person who has been harmed, their communities of care, perhaps most importantly, because there's an assumption that the wrongdoer was not born with whatever proclivities caused the wrongdoing. So there's an assumption that the society or the community or the family within which this individual was raised, and I'm thinking particularly of juveniles, created the dysfunction that resulted in this individual behaving the way he or she behaved. Hence the reason the communities of care of both the wrongdoer and the victim are involved in the process. The goal is to repair the harm caused by the offense and to foster seamless reintegration, which is important because if the individual is marginalized, those individuals, the data shows, tend to now become members of criminal subcultures where they feel more accepted. And so it's important for us to let individuals who have done wrong recognize that notwithstanding your wrongdoing, notwithstanding the fact that you must be held accountable, you are still a contributing member of this society. So the 3 pillars of restorative principles are to identify harms and needs, to point out obligations, who is obligated to repair the harm, who owes whom an apology, who owes whom reparation, etc. And engagement. Everyone must be engaged in the decision-making process, not just the wrongdoer, not just a person who has been harmed, but their communities of care, so that there's a collective decision-making process. So what is important to note? The wrongdoer needs to accept responsibility, the outcomes are managed beforehand, and all the communities are involved, not just the community of care of the wrongdoer, but the community of care of the person who has been harmed. Restorative practitioners are not in the business of negotiation. When we train, and I know there are a couple of folks who have engaged in that, the facilitator in engaging in the pre-conference interviews, which for me is perhaps more important than the actual restorative conference, is able to identify the needs of the parties to the process. So the restorative facilitator must interview all parties to the process before bringing them to the conference. That's also where the potential for harm is identified. So a particular judicial system referred a case to me, and in my restorative pre-conference interviews, I identified the potential for harm in the mother of the victim. The victim was willing to meet, The wrongdoer had admitted guilt, wanted to apologize. The victim was on board. The mother pretended she was okay with it, but certain language kept slipping. And I let the judge know that I didn't think it was safe. I think it should be referred back to the criminal justice system because I felt that not everyone was in a place and a space to accept this process. And that's also one of the responsibilities of a restorative practitioner. Restorative processes are less about resolving conflict and more about addressing the impact of the harm. And that is not the norm for a lot of folks. Once you identify the harms and the needs, who has been harmed? What caused the harm? How can it be repaired? Once you've identified the obligations, who is responsible and accountable? How can he or she repair the harm? And in essence, is he or she prepared to facilitate the needs, mostly needs, not wants, of the victim? And has the wrongdoer acknowledged his or her, the impact of his or her actions on not just the wrongdoer, but the wider community? Is this individual prepared to step forward and make amends? And sometimes wrongdoers will say, yes, they are, because it will save them from going through the system. What the science shows is if they feel that they've gotten over, let's use a simple example in one particular country, young man stole a pie off of the window of a market vendor. The police arrested him, and because the neighbors were able to identify him. The vendor says, I don't want him arrested, release him. What I want is for him to help me take my produce to the market every time I'm going because I'm getting older and I have no one to help me, etc. Purely restorative approach. So the young man is thinking, that was easy. And he did it the first week, and he did it the second week. By the third week, he missed a couple of days. By the fourth week. Now, for the restorative practitioners in the room, you already understand that when there is an agreement, which folks sign off on, there's a caveat. Failure to adhere to the terms of this agreement will result in this case being referred back to whomever the referral source, whether it be the school system, the judicial system, members of the community. There is a caveat. And so when folks don't meet the terms of the contract, it is referred back to. And for those who feel that they've gotten over very easily, they tend to not meet the terms of the contract. And that's also a question that I get a lot. So some of the restorative questions asked of all stakeholders: what happened? Who has been impacted? For the wrongdoer, what do you think you need to do to make things right? When you ask, especially juveniles, who do you think has been impacted? There's this pause as it, well, my mother, my family, my friends. You are leading them down a path of self-reflection by virtue of the types of questions you ask. And I have found the structure of the questions can be so powerful. I was invited by one organization, huge organization, because the owner felt that the employees were ungrateful. He said, I've given them extra paternity leave, I've given them this, I've given them that, I've given them raises, and all they do is grumble. So I came in, moved amongst the folks. I was introduced as a mediator. And my first circle question was, name one thing that you are grateful for as it relates to working in this company. And folks had to stop and think. Well, you know, I'm actually grateful for the extra paternity leave. Which also helped the owner. He felt emotional because even though they were grumbling, they actually acknowledged all that he was doing. So his entire stance also changed. So to adopt a restorative stance means to separate the deed from the doer. You reject the act, the unacceptable behavior, but you do not reject the actor. By acknowledging the fact that the actor still has intrinsic worth, can still contribute to society, even while holding them accountable and not marginalizing them, they are less likely to recidivate. They're less likely to gravitate towards criminal subcultures. And you would find that there is an ease of forgiveness even while folks are held accountable. And that's not something that is very easy for us to do. But restorative processes can only be used when the wrongdoer has admitted guilt, the incident has adversely affected or harmed someone, there's a need to repair the harm, the victim wants to participate. All four elements must exist before a restorative process should be, and I'm using the word should because the courts have been sending folks to mediate before you litigate, sending folks for restorative processes when these have not been. Yes, there's been an admission of guilt. Yes, the incident has adversely affected someone. Yes, there's a need to repair the harm, but the victim has not indicated he or she wants to participate. And the wrongdoer is showing no remorse. So that's a recipe for disaster. So I want to talk now about how I applied restorative principles to support my argument for a discursive public health approach to wrongdoing and the wrongdoer. It is important for us to acknowledge, as most of us in this room have already done, punishment as retribution is ancient. It's not working anymore, and we can tell by our recidivism rates, by the increasing number of juveniles who are entering into the system. In fact, our correctional system, its raison d'etre is to correct, is to rehabilitate wrongdoers. Instead, it's only serving to protect society against crime. And as such, it's not focused on the rehabilitation of the wrongdoers. Rehabilitation, I argue, should start on the first day of incarceration, preparing the wrongdoers to reintegrate into society. And notice I am not saying that a restorative approach should absolutely replace the existing criminal justice system. It cannot. However, when they work in tandem, there's a better chance of preparing our incarcerated for reintegration, for seamless reintegration. So from day one, you start preparing them. Now, there are those who argue we should not spend money on educating wrongdoers. I have to pay for my child's education. Why should he or she? It's going to cost us more in the long run if we do not. If someone is incarcerated for 2 years and goes in with a high school diploma and comes out with a high school diploma, that 2 years will feel like 6 years because they're now competing with folks who have achieved higher either educational or vocational skills. So it makes sense to either teach them a skill or 2 years an associate's degree. We have to start thinking strategically. Interestingly enough, there was a process in Charlotte, North Carolina, where the last 18 months of a prisoner's sentence was spent in a halfway house. I had taken one of my classes to visit. They each had their own room with indoor plumbing, and each person had secured a job or someone secured a job for them. So they would be working, let's say, McDonald's. They go to work, they're expected back on the compound. If it's 15 minutes from McDonald's, you're expected back at 3:15. And for 18 months, this particular individual, I'm seeing him in my mind's eye. He worked at McDonald's. He's not paying rent. He's saving all his money. He now has 18 months of experience when he's released. He applied for a better job because he now has experience. They assisted him in finding accommodation. He got a room, furnished room, etc., etc. It was disappointing when my students messaged me to tell me that there was a push to shut this facility down, which then tells me, is it that you find it's too successful? Is it that you're finding that the recidivism rate of those who come through this facility, the recidivism rate is falling? Is it that you feel it's more important to have the prisons populated so that companies can enjoy the benefits of the prison industrial complex? Why exactly would you want to shut down something that works? So that raised a lot of questions for me. So again, we're assuming that society's desire is actually to reduce crime, to reintegrate wrongdoers. And I'm operating with that assumption. So you've heard me say the correctional system actually does not correct. And we would have seen, we would have read about the manner in which the correctional system treats inmates. This is why I used the term earlier. If you treat them like animals when they are released, what do you think they will behave like? So the onus is on us, individually and collectively, to ensure that while we are holding them accountable, we're still meeting their biopsychosocial needs. Because if the issue was some type of addiction, some type of unaddressed trauma, incarcerating them for X number of years without addressing that and then releasing them, you are releasing a ticking time bomb. So I'm going to apply this to a particular topic that is very controversial. I was hauled before the committee in a particular country because I dared to suggest that domestic violence be handled restoratively. This is my argument. And forgive me, I'm going to use the traditional roles, but I will say that those roles are being reversed very slowly and very quietly. The abuser in a domestic violence case is typically male, and the abuse is typically female. That role is changing, but for ease of reference, I will use those historic roles. So there's a case, the police receive a service call, they go to the home, they remove the woman and the children. The arrest or not, the abuser. They put the woman and the children in a safe house. All of you know about instances where the woman and the children keep calling the abuser and the woman is eventually murdered. We all know about cases like that. Restoratively, we need to find out why is that the case. So I'll take a pause right there. The male, if he's arrested and released, and if he's not arrested, eventually, I'm using the word recruits another woman, and then the cycle repeats itself. There are two reasons. One, his biopsychosocial needs were never addressed. And in fact, unless the victim herself receives counseling, then her biopsychosocial needs are not properly addressed. And she will never feel safe, psychologically safe, if his needs are not addressed. So removing the victims is not enough. The court has to mandate the abuser to go for counseling. If it's a drug addiction, alcohol, trauma, whatever it is, the court has to mandate him. Otherwise, the victim is actually never psychologically safe. In addition to which, the victim's needs must also be addressed. And there are a lot of hidden and nuanced needs that may be different for each victim. If you do not address the wrongdoer's needs, he will recruit another victim. So when I was hauled before the committee, their argument was, why do we need to spend taxpayers' dollars on the wrongdoer, the abuser? When I explained it that way, some of them understood, some of the diehards refused. No, the focus is on the victim. And I'm saying, but even as we focus on the victim's own psychological safety is impacted by the healing of the abuser. And so the argument went back and forth. Not everyone will appreciate or be willing to accept, and sometimes we have to know when to move on. So that approach that I am talking about is part of a public health approach. A public health approach deals with violence as though it's an epidemic or a contagious disease. It analyzes the violence to the very root. What caused it? What still exists of the original cause? What can be done to heal long-term, not short-term? And punishment is a short-term solution. And I think that's key. We could argue that, I think I mentioned this earlier, as communities of care. Let's look at a juvenile. The juvenile is born normal. And at 15, and okay, I'll give you an example. In another country, I was training the prosecutors. There was a 9-year-old who had been arrested for stealing food. Because it was his first offense, they just released him. And at 15, he raped a senior citizen. So they're saying to me, you see, we should have arrested him and thrown away the key because now he's a menace to society. So I asked, why did he steal food at 9? We don't know. That's not we're not interested in that. But if there was a reason why he stole the food, let's say he's being abused at home, you sent him right back into that abusive situation. So now he's coming back to you at 15, having escalated, having deteriorated. And that's when they kind of went, oh, very begrudgingly, I must say, oh. So if you had dug deep at 9 to identify why he was stealing food, there's a chance that he may not be coming back to you at 15. But if it was some dysfunctional community environment, you just open the door. Another example in the same country. One young man stabbed another. They were both 18. They were actually best friends. They were both 18. One stabbed the other. He was placed on probation. It was a flesh wound. He was placed on probation. I came in as a restorative practitioner. I took him through a restorative process, asking him the same questions. And when I asked him, what was going through your mind when you picked up the knife and stabbed your best friend? He said, huh? I said, close your eyes, think about it. What was going through your mind? He said, we were play fighting. And then he said the exact words that these 4 guys who beat me up every morning and take my lunch and my money on the bus say to me. And he said, Miss, I just flipped and I know I'm wrong and I have to take whatever punishment, but I just heard these words and I just lost it. So I called the police officers in. It appears he's a victim of bullying. Are you all aware of that? That's not our role. Called his mother in. She said, yes, he complains about these guys every day. So I asked the police if they would mind riding the bus with him. Since they're putting him on probation, you're opening him back up. So they rode the bus with him in plain clothes. They saw the interaction. They accosted the bullies. And I understand after the fact that it stopped and he was doing much better. That is a public health approach, getting to the bottom of the problem, not just releasing, okay, it's a first-time offense and you release them. In the same country, there was an incident where a young lady was arrested. She had been warned several times. She was a juvenile and she would run away from home. And in that country at the time, wandering was a crime. Mind you, only the girls were charged with wandering, the boys weren't, but that's a whole other conversation. So she would keep running away from home and they would keep sending her back. And after about the 5th time, she had to be placed in juvenile detention in this particular country. So we interviewed her, and it turns out her mother was prostituting her, and they would always send her back to the mother, and she would always run away. And then when she met whatever statutory limitation of how many times you can be arrested for wandering, they sent her to this home. Now, here's something else that came out of that interview. Myself and a co-facilitator were talking to her, and a correctional officer was standing behind her chair. And her responses were very short. And she almost was talking to us with her eyes. So my co-facilitator and I looked at each other, and my co-facilitator asked the correctional officer if he could take her to the bathroom. And he hesitatingly did. And that's when it came out, because of course, there was also abuse in that juvenile facility. So sometimes strategic move, observation, even I call it spirit of discernment. But to do all of that, we have to have worked on ourselves, starting at the individual. If we are not sufficiently self-reflective, if we have, if we wear rose-colored glasses as we look at the world, we will never see what's really impacting other people. So it's important that we start with self, which is how we do our restorative practices, the lifestyle approach. You start with self. And part of my training also includes self-care, because you cannot pour from an empty cup. In a particular country, I was training some teachers, and I was speaking to them about self-care and explaining that if you are living with trauma, you cannot be unbiased in your approach to people's children. People send their children to you every day. And if you are living with trauma every day, you will bring that to the classroom. And one teacher ran out crying. And then after the fact, we found out she was actually living in an abusive situation. And that was not my intention. However, if you make a conscious decision to stay in that abusive situation and don't seek help, it's manifesting in the way you treat children. And it turns out she was extremely abusive to the children in the school, et cetera, which the principal shared. So it starts with you. You cannot do this work unless you have done the work with you. You cannot engage in restorative justice unless you are a restorative practitioner with yourself. You cannot pour from an empty cup. So I say all of this to say, we start with self, we move out into our immediate families, into our communities, churches, schools, and eventually there will be overlapping circles, society, different countries, but it starts with self. And this is why when we adopt this public health approach to violence, we start with the individual. Every time I do a restorative practices training, I start off with emotional intelligence. One country invited me in to certify people in restorative processes. And I said, it's not just about that. We're going to start off with emotional intelligence, and we're going to end with self-care. It's not simply about the substantive content. because you're assuming that people are in a place and a space to be able to execute, and that is not always the case. The wrongdoer, I like to say, and I touched on this, the victim's sense of peace is inextricably tied to the wrongdoer's healing. Otherwise, no matter how much we help the victim, if the wrongdoer is still traumatized, negative, abusive, verbally, financially, emotionally, whatever, that victim cannot heal. There will always be that measure of fear. Now, this brings me to another touchy subject. In mediation, as a mediator, we're supposed to be neutrals. I actually have a concern with that. If there is a power dynamic in the room and we remain neutral, then we are actually supporting the power dynamic. But that's just my take on it. So when I mediate, I actually subsume my mediation into a restorative process. I ask restorative questions, particularly of the person who has more power. What were you thinking? Who do you think has been impacted by what you've said or what you've done? Because if we remain neutral, then I think, and this is just me and the mediators, I'm putting on my bulletproof vest. I believe we're part of the problem if we remain neutral in a case where there's an obvious power dynamic. I encourage the recognition of violence as a health issue. Unless society sees it from a contextual, biological, environmental, systemic, unless society acknowledges the social stressors, we will always treat wrongdoers as non-human, as separate from the rest of us. And I think that's part of the problem. That's why our recidivism rates are so high. There is underlying historic or situational trauma in every violent act. And if we only address the violent act that is in front of us, we've dismissed everything historically and contextually that has led up to it. I did some research on some years ago on the impact of quality of legal representation on the likelihood of receiving a death sentence or being sentenced to life. And it was interesting to find out that a lot of the public defenders or the private attorneys, the ones whose clients received a death sentence, 65% had public defenders. But of the private attorneys, one was a drug addict, one was a documented pedophile. There was always an issue. And that also, and this is years and years and years ago, but that also led me to believe that it's important to dig deeper than just make decisions based on what's in front of us. And that's what, as a society, we tend to do. And especially where the wrongdoer is concerned, it is important to look at underlying factors, ask questions, go into communities and make the process discursive. Talk to people, let people talk back, have community meetings. I was invited to do some training in another country. The government was forcing the citizens to accept ex-combatants back into the community, and the citizens were up in arms. They were not having it. So the goal was to foster, to facilitate restorative processes to help them accept the ex-combatants back. And what was interesting is the process sets it up for folks to just listen to each other. That's the bottom line. There is a talking piece, and the norms and guidelines are set up front. You cannot talk unless you have the talking piece, which means pretty much when it's your turn, you can speak, but you have to listen. And here is, I'm thinking of one particular case. Here is a young man saying to members of his community, "You all don't remember me? I was the guy sitting on the corner begging, and all of you would pass by me. Some of you would spit, some of you would throw things at me. Do you remember me? Yeah, remember my parents died and I became homeless and none of you would help me? Well, when someone told me if I go to join this particular group, I'll get X thousand US dollars per week, what else was I supposed to do? And you could see the eyes open. Oh, that was, oh my God. So they listened to him. So they're now acknowledging their role in his process. Yes, he's an adult and he's responsible for his own decision making, but now he has to listen to them. We have seen what people like you have done in the world, and it's scary to think that we would be living next to you. And I mean, some of those pictures are so frightening, and so now they're listening to each other. So then the question is asked, what can you do to work together? Well, I guess, do you have somewhere to live? Do you have a job? I could give you a job. I have a room in the back. I could give you a room, but I don't want you around my kids because I still have a problem with what you've done, but I understand how you got there. And so that's the discursive process. First, they listen to each other. Then, for the most part, because there are some diehard people, but what the science has shown is the ones who are diehard tend to have unaddressed trauma themselves. And we recognize we can't save everyone. But for the most part, especially in a situation like receiving ex-combatants, there were so many tears. Folks are now feeling, oh my God, but your parents were my friends. I didn't realize that was you. Tears and healing. And for those who have been trained, you know that at the end of a process, there's something called breaking bread that helps to facilitate the reintegration. As you, the facilitator, is writing up the contract that everyone must sign, they're breaking bread. And so you're leaving them to actually facilitate the reintegration. And if you look, you'll see the patting on the back and wow, I didn't know that was you. And I didn't notice that you were no longer sitting on the corner, and conversation, healing, reintegration. It's actually scientifically crafted. It seems very based on feelings and emotions, but it's actually quite scientifically crafted. And so that's part of adopting a public health approach. That's part of also addressing the biopsychosocial and criminogenic needs of the wrongdoer. Because if we focus only on the victim, then the victim never has absolute healing, and the wrongdoer will more than likely recidivate unless we address their needs as well, which is where a lot of the pushback comes from. Why should we be spending taxpayers' money on whatever the wrongdoer's needs are? So there are some similarities and some differences. Both systems hold wrongdoers accountable. And I have to repeat that. Restorative justice does, in fact, hold people accountable. It just uses innovative ways to hold people accountable. It's not necessarily punitive. And especially in a society where people are sent to jail as punishment, but they are there for punishment, especially in a society where the correctional system actually does not correct, especially in a system where we're very judgmental, we're very punitive by nature, and we're happy to separate, segregate, and lock them up and throw away the key. Innovative approaches become key because the United States in particular has the highest prison population, fastest growing incarceration rate, which tells me that whatever we're doing is not working. And of course, recidivism rates worldwide are increasing exponentially. I think certain countries, it's 67%. So we have to come up with something different. And we've realized that fostering reintegration of the wrongdoer, rather than stigmatizing and marginalizing, is part of what will reduce recidivism rates. And ultimately, the goal is to keep society safe, but just using the correctional system in its current iteration is actually not keeping us safe. So the biggest similarity is holding people accountable. The biggest difference is the manner in which it is done. And that is very difficult for a lot of people, especially those on the side of keeping society safe, locking up and throwing away the key, removing wrongdoers from society, without addressing what caused them to be wrongdoers in the first place. And I like to use this particular example in this one country. 35 young men housed in a juvenile detention center. 3 of them ran away, and we were called in. My team and I went in. We interviewed every young man and all the teachers. We produced a report, gave it to the minister, and the report said these 9 boys are suicidal. There are indications that the staff are abusing the young men physically, verbally, and sexually. And that report was put on, oh, they were happy to pay. One of the fastest checks I've ever gotten, and they put that report on a shelf. Within the next month, one young man killed the other one. They arrested the first one, tried him as an adult. And so I asked the question, what was his background like? What do you mean? Where did he come from in terms of family life, and what reports were received from him while he was at that particular juvie? We don't have that information. Well, why not? Well, it turns out when he was growing up, his parents would chain him to what was like a dog cage when they went to work as a child. That is no excuse, but at least it explains something. Then you put him in a juvenile detention center where he's being abused. What did you think would happen? So I used this example. I said, let's suppose the issue at that center was the water, that the water was poisonous and it caused the young men to react a certain way. So the first one murdered one. So you have 35 young men. 1 was the murderer, 1 was the victim. So you're down to 33. If it is in fact the water, 33 of them are still drinking that water. Eventually, there will be more murders. I said, I'm using water because I'm not accusing anybody. I'm saying you need to dig to find out what the problem is. And when you find out it's the water, you change the filtration system. But if you leave the other 33 there, eventually there will be more murders. And naturally, there were more murders. And so I share that to say we're not always successful. And we hate to say, I told you so. But sometimes a lot of approaches are checking a box. Well, we did check. We've done what we were supposed to do. We hired you, check. We paid you, check. Put the file, put the report on a shelf. That comes back down to us. If the individuals who are making the decisions were restoratively inclined, self-reflected, and if they were able to adopt an approach of, this is just a symptom, what is the problem? I need to know what the actual problem is before I decide what approach should be taken. Before I float a contract or float a consultancy, what am I floating it for? The symptom or the problem? I don't just bring in a contractor to say, or a consultant to say, fix that. That's actually the symptom. Bring someone in to fix what's causing what you see in front of you. And so the restorative approach really wants to make sure that we don't lose sight of the ultimate goal. And as long as we stay fixated on the symptom and not the actual problem, we will never have healing and transformation. Healing and transformation of communities, healing and transformation of relationships. In essence, this restorative process aims to normalize discursive dialogue and negotiation, as opposed to this existing adversarial process. Now, when you touch on adversarial processes, it opens a can of worms, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but the goal is for justice, not win or lose. And that's all I'm going to say on that. We all want justice, not just my win ratio. So we want to have open, discursive, non-judgmental dialogue. We really want to be honest about why we are doing what we are doing. And we can't do that unless individually and ultimately collectively we have become self-reflective. We cannot do it if we are so focused on the victim that we just want the wrongdoer to be locked up and out of sight. Because if that wrongdoer has some traumatic, unaddressed trauma, you lock them up for 4 years and you release them without addressing the trauma, they have been re-traumatized while incarcerated, so they're coming out worse than they went in. So it's strategic, but we can't continue doing what we're doing because we have to look at risks and needs of society. If they present a greater risk when they come out than when they went in, then what are we doing? I guess in the final analysis, the restorative process is used to bring victims and wrongdoers together, to enable the wrongdoer to acknowledge what he or she did, to enable them to hear what harm they caused and how it impacted the victim individually, the victim's community of care, society, to have them acknowledge, I did wrong and I'm willing to accept whatever the consequences are. And some people are not willing to, and those people will have to go to the traditional system. We acknowledge that. But we also have to acknowledge our role collectively in causing the wrongdoer to have done what he or she did. And that's the hardest part, because we are never ready to accept our role in it. And we are always arguing that restorative justice is too soft, which I touched on. It's actually very difficult for the wrongdoer to admit guilt. It's very emotional when you sit with a wrongdoer, one who is truly remorseful. That's even harder. Some of them would prefer to go to prison because that opens up all the trauma that has been unaddressed, all the fears, all the insecurities. It's actually harder for some of them. They would rather just throw me in jail. And that speaks to the impact of a restorative approach. It is not too soft, but if we adopt this punitive approach to it, we will think that it is. It's more than just giving and getting justice. Yes, we want the wrongdoer to be held accountable, but it's not that simple. It's about influencing human behavior, and using an iterative process to do that, and inviting the wrongdoer to be part of the process. The ones who are truly remorseful, and that's actually the majority. It's only a small minority who are the ones who will have to go through the traditional system. The vast majority are truly remorseful, but the system does not give them an opportunity to express that remorse. And so it's not just about giving and getting justice, it's about positively influencing and changing human behavior. And so I wanted to make sure that there's enough time for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think everybody has been very rapt, and there's been a healthy discussion going on in the chat. I think I'm just going to I'll give priority to the actual raised hands first, and then if we have time, we'll filter in the questions. So David, you are the first one to have raised your hand. Let's go to you.
Well, first, I'd like to thank Dr. Williams. What an engaging presentation. You could tell how engaged everyone was in the group. I'm happy to see our profession is an integral part of addressing society's problems. And speaking just for myself, I'm very philosophically on board. I do have a couple of questions. One is the role of the mediator. It seems that the mediator has to have some skills in terms of almost being a mental health practitioner or social worker to be able to do the diagnostic work to lead both the victim and the offender in the appropriate restorative direction. And this is related. The other question is the complexity and enormity of the challenge. Even somebody who has a lot of resources, is blessed with money and a good support system, even they have a long, hard road a lot of the time to reforming themselves. So I'd like you to comment, if you can, about those challenges.
So you've used mediator and restorative interchangeably.
Okay, yep.
That right there is, yeah. So I am a certified mediator in one jurisdiction, and I was in another. And the reason I use the word was is because I recognize in that jurisdiction that shall remain nameless, mediation was transactional. There was no desire to actually fix anything. In fact, that jurisdiction typically kept both parties separate, and the mediator did shuttle mediation back and forth. That horrified me, and I recognize it's just the whole process. Now, in that jurisdiction as well, the legal fraternity took charge of the mediators. When I initially wanted to do my internship, you have to do an understudy or internship to be able to be certified in that mediation. The first question I was asked is, are you an attorney? If you're not an attorney, you cannot do your understudying with us. So that's the first problem. Having said that, the mediation training I received was traditional mediation training. And a mediator is a neutral. So the mediator is really, the role is not to diagnose, to be a social worker. That's a mediator. Now, a restorative process puts you in that role only as it relates to discernment. And this discernment is what will cause you to raise additional questions to get people to think. Having said that, if in your pre-conference interview, you pick up that there is a mental issue, then it's your responsibility as a restorative practitioner to say to the referring body, I don't think this is in my wheelhouse. I think I've identified something. I think you need to refer these people to some type of assessment and then make a determination if restorative processes or even mediation is the way to go. Because the manner in which this individual interacted with me actually didn't seem normal, but that's not my area of expertise. So I'm asking the court or whomever is the referring agency to please have the parties assessed. One of the challenges is a lot of people are not humble enough to acknowledge that this is outside their area of expertise. And they will take it on when they're not trained in whatever psychological, social work, counseling. But the fact that the pre-conference interview revealed that there's a problem is a win for the decision makers, but you have got to say to the referring body, this is outside my wheelhouse, I'm referring it back to you. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I had a part two, but let other people have the floor. Let them ask their questions.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Mm-hmm.
Sadia, you're up next.
Yeah, first, just to echo, thank you so much for this present. It really is brilliant and just very reassuring and inspiring to know that, you know, in such a punitive world that, you know, individuals like you are doing this work. So thank you so much for that. I was curious if you could speak a little bit to how, you know, you mentioned that these restorative processes require people to kind of acknowledge and take accountability. I think, you know, and you spoke to this a little bit. I was wondering if you can expand. In our society, there's such a discouragement and even hostility towards self-reflection, towards humility. You know, it's seen as weakness, and from the legal system standpoint, right, there is very much emphasis on don't acknowledge the wrongdoing you've caused. I'm curious, what have you done? How have you tried to kind of support individuals in kind of taking accountability, just given that there's so many of these, again, societal and also kind of individual psychological, you know, tendencies to not want to do that?
So it depends on the country and the jurisdiction. In one particular country, in fact, we just finished training 600 teachers on restorative processes. They're certified, and we started off with emotional intelligence. What I have found, which worked in another country, is start at the top. In one country, we trained she's called the Chancellor of the Judiciary, which is the highest level judicial officer. And then the Chief Justice, Chief Magistrate, and the top 22, it was 25 of them. So if you can start there, what came out of that is the Chief Magistrate transformed her children's court physically, changed the colors on the wall, put a television in, put books, etc. And then the prosecutors complained about her because in her courtroom, she was sharing with me, everybody's talking. And then she said, stop, I need to ask this offender a question. Young man, what happened? And she went through all the restorative questions that I had trained her on. And she said the prosecutor lost his mind. What were you thinking at the time? Who do you think has been hurt? What do you think needs to happen to make it right? And she said, all he didn't do was pull out his hair. And she said that helped her. Her disposition was unusual, but it came out of the actual needs that she picked up from what the wrongdoer shared with her. And so for me, training is key. Out of the 600 teachers, about 500 of them have moved on to really implementing restorative processes to the point where their students are forming their own circles. 100 of them are not sufficiently self-reflective. They still have enough unaddressed trauma that they're just not buying into it. Even though the students are trying to hold them accountable by forming the circles, they've started coming late to avoid having to do it. So it starts with not just training people on restorative processes, but starting off with emotional intelligence and ending with self-care. I also do restorative leadership for the leadership of whatever organization, which changes the dynamic and how the leaders, the supervisors, for example, treat their subordinates, because that's also part of the process, part of the problem. So I actually contextualize it. I assess, depending on what organization, what country, what community, and then come up with, I ask very intentional questions, because I will have interacted with and heard everybody's side of the story and asked questions to elicit additional information. Someone may not know, oh, really? I thought you said, well, no, I didn't say, and then create the safe space so people could talk. But But there's always this issue of the adversarial approach and the punitive nature of our society. I can only do it person by person, community by community. And then we create a community of practice, an online presence with weekly sessions, and support each other. And we can only do it one person at a time so that their concentric circle meets somebody else's, and eventually it will spread. It's not an overnight fix, but we have to be intentional and we have to be consistent. So the first circle, if one person comes, have your circle with the one person, especially if you're on your job or on your campus and you're trying to start this, it'll take time. Everyone won't buy in at the same time. But what we tend to do is, oh, nobody's coming, and we throw up our hands and walk away. But consistency and intentionality are key. Does that help?
It does, yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And we've had some questions in the chat about resources for where do you get this additional certification and training. And I know you said you had a kind of resource page maybe on your PowerPoint. And other than kind of going to your websites, do you have a quick snippet of additional resources before we hand over to Michelle for the next question?
IIRP.
IIRP.
They're like family. Yeah. And so I started off getting the certificate for that embarrassing moment I spoke about. And then I realized, oh, I only needed a few more classes to start the masters. And so I eventually did the masters, and they're like family. In one country, I was invited in to do hundreds of people, and IIRP sent down a team to assist. Because of course I'm in constant contact with them. They're making resources available to me. And I said, ooh, this is too much. I can't do this alone. And they actually sent a team down to help. So it's not a plug for IIRP, but it is.
Love that. An unintentional plug, but I think the bigger message is that it does take a community, and it takes time, and it takes resource, and it takes patience.
Absolutely.
And it's not necessarily an iterative process that can be just kind of established in a silo and then kind of repeated in whatever circumstance. Everything is very intentional and circumstantial and depends upon the people that you're dealing with. Michelle, let's turn
you have to study your context, because what works in one context. I'm actually having that conversation now with a group of peacemakers. What worked in Zimbabwe will not work in Zambia. They both start with Z, but you can't do that. You have to actually give them the respect of what they call localization or co-creation, involve the people who are the ones receiving the assistance. You can sit here and decide what they need. And that's part of the problem as well. Yes.
And I noticed you're also a consultant with the Mediators Beyond Borders International. And I think that's one of the tenets of that organization that I've worked with in the past, that you really want tailored, specific solutions that really address the issues that are raised in whatever jurisdiction or conflict where your services are being retained.
I have to put a plug in for MBBI as well. That's my other family. And I was able to do work through them in Nigeria and Indonesia to do restorative training. And they are fabulous. If you're not a member, you should be. And they have reach all over the world. When I do training for them virtually, I have participants from every corner of the world, and it is always fabulous.
I have to second that. So Michelle, you've been very patient. On to your question now.
Sure, great. Thank you so very much. Dr. Williams, your presentation is definitely excellent. I actually participate in mediation and restorative practices, and it was so refreshing to see, like in the earlier parts of your presentation, the distinction between the two and how I share that with individuals. The questions I had, one was in regards to when you talked about the domestic violence and maybe even other relational type of situations where, of course, you're working with the person that created the harm and really trying to deal with them, help them as far as the trauma that has been caused, previously. Is there a, I guess, a understanding possibly for the person who's created the harm that the relationship, especially in regards to domestic violence, that while they are also delving into being restored, that the relationship may not. So as far as to keep the safety of the victim. So that's one. And then also in regards to, I know you said that you do work with organizations, but do you also work with companies who have created harm? Whether it's environmental, whether it's from the tort type of situation where an organization has caused harm with to an individual accident and taking the accountability or accepting accountability in that respects, because a lot of course companies and individuals do not want to accept the accountability, because that goes against the whole issue in regards to the legal aspect of accepting of being guilty or being viewed as guilty. So those are the two aspects that I want to address. Would love for you to address.
Thank you. In situations of domestic violence, the restorative practitioner's role is not to interact with the wrongdoer. The role is to have the court understand the biopsychosocial and criminogenic needs of the wrongdoer such that the court mandates the wrongdoer go for counseling. Because the court has a tendency to, they call it victim offender mediation. You cannot send a victim and an offender in the case of domestic violence to mediation unless both parties have received unless both parties' needs have been addressed, especially in the case of the wrongdoer. If you bring them together in mediation, that's where the power dynamic still exists. And of course, because
Yes.
mediators are supposed to be neutral, it's
Yes.
going to exist. So the restorative approach says to the court, this person has to have some kind of assessment, psychological assessment, and then sent to whatever the assessment says, alcoholism, drug abuse, trauma counseling, whatever, first, before they go to the mediator. So the restorative practitioner is not supposed to be interacting with the abuser just like that.
Okay, but they do understand, even if the person is caused harm, they do understand, even if they're not interacting with a restorative practitioner, that this does not mean that the relationship may be, restored because they're getting their needs addressed.
They won't understand anything until they get their needs addressed.
Okay.
Right. So it's important for that to, right. First, they have to be mandated to go to get their needs, because they don't understand anything until that point.
Okay. And even
after, then when they are, then they're put together in some type of mediation process. I prefer it to be a restorative process, because then they get to listen to the victim say, I don't want this.
Okay.
Assuming that they have, their needs have been addressed psychosocially, then they're supposed to understand it. If they don't, then they still have some
work to do.
Correct. So it's iterative, it's discursive, it doesn't have to move overnight. You can't just send somebody to victim offender mediation, the court.
Oh, okay.
I've been expected to. With respect to the environmental, I personally haven't done it as an individual. I was a member of a team that worked with a humongous organization. And if the individual members think a certain way, then the organization is going to manifest that. So sometimes you cannot approach it as an organization, but you have to start working on the individuals individually. If an individual, if the CEO, CFO, if they cannot see that they're doing something wrong, then nothing we do is going to change it. You have to work on them individually with the understanding that not everyone will get it.
That's true. That's true. Thank you.
Sure.
I love that, turning the C-suite into a SEE suite that actually sees the problem. Masana, I think you are up next for what will have to be one of our final questions because of time. Please take the mic and unmute yourself. Nope, I don't think we can hear you. And if we're having very faintly, we can hear you now. It's getting a little better.
Get closer to the mic.
Oh, it's still too quiet for me to hear. Dr. Williams, are you hearing anything? I think it's still too garbled.
Every other word.
Good afternoon, everyone.
There we go.
Okay.
It is me, Masane Jallo from the Gambia. I have been listening to the presentation. It's very interactive and educative. Really, I learn a lot. I'm also a restorative justice practitioner in the Gambia here. I attended my study at Santiago University, sponsored by National Community Practice. So what the question that I want to ask is that, how best can we, make this restorative practice to be widened upon, and then so that it can reach so many parts in the world. Like in the Gambia here, schools needed it. We have started doing a pilot project on it. But the thing is, we need a support because we are new into this system. And then I am alone here who is trying to drive in everything. I even, publish a copy that shows the country that, restorative practice in schools is important as far as the crime rates in the Gambia is increasing day after day. Every week you will hear somebody is being killed or there is a crimes of somewhere else. So schools dropout is coming higher in our country. So we wanted to introduce the school as a countrywide. And then I'm working with Ministry of Basic and Secondary under the life skills, which are responsible of guide and counseling, mediation, gender-based violence, other crimes that are happening in school to establish what we call safe school. But I don't know how best if someone wants to work with you, how can we work together to see that, restorative practice has been introduced in school, and then we save a lot of girls, children, and even women that have been affected by violence or crimes, so and support them, to do away with drug abuses or substances abuses that are affecting a lot of children. In fact, a recent report showed that, out of 113 cases, 11 of them has passed away because of the new drugs that is being discovered in Africa, West Africa, which is from Sierra Leone. And then it is imported into our country called Kus, which they locally call Ginabas. So I'm very much, interested in restorative justice because I know it can do a lot, to transform the society from where it is to the best level of it. So this is what I want to ask. How best can we
So
work on? And then I am also very much interested if you can elaborate on peer juries in schools where, peers will be sitting in cycle and then trying to uh, uh, solve their own conflicts. Thank you, Doctor. You
thank you.
really educated today.
So we recently trained 100 students on peer mediation. So we also trained students on peer mediation. So we trained the 600 teachers, we trained 100 students on peer mediation. But as a restorative practitioner, you are part of a family. When I train individuals, I encourage them to call each other up. So for example, one of the persons I trained in Durban, South Africa, is asking for help. And she said they have no money. So she's just going to pay my airfare and accommodation. I'll probably stay at her house and fly me out. I'm not charging. So as part of the family, we also have to look out for each other. So reach out, and you might be surprised at how many people would be willing to help you. The hardest part is always, of course, the airfare and the accommodation, but not everyone is looking to be paid because this is so important. So reach out to me and we'll see how we can get you some help.
And that was
Training the peer mediators and with pushing restorative processes in the Gambia.
And that was another question that came up, was how do we contact you? Because there's been a lot of interest.
Please contact me on LinkedIn, which is probably where you saw this advertised. So please contact me on LinkedIn.
And I popped in your LinkedIn at the very beginning of your presentation, and I will put the link to your LinkedIn in again. And I just want to say thank you so much for an amazing presentation. Everybody has been so engaged, and you can just read through the comments that we will send and post with the recording, and just see how much everybody truly appreciated the wisdom that you shared with us today. Maria, I don't know, I'm sure you want to echo my thanks, but this has been truly wonderful.
Absolutely do want to echo your thanks, and all of the comments that you've been getting in the chat. When you get a minute, Dianne, do take a look at the wonderful feedback that you're getting. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely,
And
my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
yeah, we truly appreciate your contribution to our community here of scholars and practitioners who are eager to figure out other ways of applying all of this wonderful knowledge to our work.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me an air and letting me get on my soapbox. I appreciate it.
It was a wonderful one. Thank you so much. And everyone, we will see you next month. Leah Wing from UMass Amherst is going to talk about the new work around ethics and AI practice in this field. So please join us the first Thursday in September. And with that, we will be adjourning for the day here. Thank you, everyone, for being with us.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.